People are afraid of being manipulated, so they study manipulation. They want to know how to read hidden intentions behind someone's words. They want to spot the behavioral patterns that set traps. There's this low-grade anxiety whispering, if you don't catch it, you'll pay for it. And that anxiety pulls people in. But here's something nobody talks about. Studying manipulation doesn't automatically set you free. In some cases, it actually makes you more reactive to other people's signals, not less. Now stay with me because this is not a contradiction. This is exactly how it works. The whole point of manipulation is to get you thinking. More specifically, to get you thinking about the wrong things. The moment you raise your antenna to read someone's signals, the person controlling the situation has already locked onto your frequency. They know what you're looking for, so they show you exactly that. They know what you're afraid of, so they give it the lightest possible touch. The most dangerous manipulation is already finished by the time you think you're detecting it. So today, we're not talking about manipulation tactics. We're talking about the psychological foundation that makes manipulation work in the first place. What internal conditions make us vulnerable, where those conditions come from, and what actually changes once you understand them. 3 things in that order. Let's start with the difference between people manipulation works on and people it doesn't. Most people explain this as a difference in intelligence or life experience. Smart people don't fall for it. Worldly people see it coming. That's not wrong, but it's only half the picture. There's one vulnerability factor that comes up again and again in psychological discussions of this topic, and it's this: the need for other people's approval. When you hear approval seeking, it sounds like a self-esteem problem, like something only insecure people deal with. But that's not it at all. Some of the most accomplished, capable, well-liked people out there carry this need very strongly. Sensitivity to rejection, anxious attachment, a constant habit of monitoring how others are reacting to you. When those things stack on top of each other, vulnerability in certain relationships becomes much more likely. That's a pattern interpersonal psychology has examined for a long time. Here's the key trait these people share. They are highly attuned to other people's reactions. That sensitivity makes them socially skilled in many ways. But in certain situations, it's also what makes them easy to shake. People who want to move you around have an instinctive feel for this. Not because they've analyzed it academically, because they've spent years handling people and developed a gut sense for it. And what they do first is not attack. It's not threaten. What they do first, in most cases, is approve. They see you. They name the part of yourself you haven't fully claimed yet, and they tell you exactly how valuable it is. The first time this happens, people usually land in one of 2 places. This person really gets me, or there's something special about this person. Both are traps, because from that moment on, you start assigning extra weight to everything they say. Whatever comes out of their mouth next, your brain filters it through the warmth you felt at the beginning. This is how a first impression works like a lens over every judgment that follows. That early positive feeling colors every interpretation that comes after it. Now here's the important part. This isn't because you're naive. This is because you're human. Our brains were shaped over tens of thousands of years to survive inside groups. And inside a group, other people's approval genuinely mattered. It affected how resources got distributed. It affected how safe you were. So when we're recognized, the brain's reward circuits light up. When we're rejected, the neural pathways that process pain get activated. This response is largely automatic. You can't simply will it off. People who want to influence you exploit that automatic response. And when you really understand how precisely they do it, you gain something bigger than just avoiding manipulation. The second stage is building a sense of debt. After using approval to create a connection, the person who wants to move you does something for you, an unsolicited favor. But this favor has a very specific quality. It's not big enough to feel like a burden, but it's too specific to dismiss. It lands right on that line. And that is not an accident. The human brain carries a powerful drive to return what it receives. We call this reciprocity. It's also a product of evolution. Cooperation inside groups required balanced exchange. Give and receive had to stay roughly equal. So we have a deep, almost automatic discomfort with being on the receiving end of something we haven't matched. This reciprocity effect has shown up consistently in social psychology, research going back decades. That's exactly why an unsolicited favor is so effective. It plants a quiet sense of debt inside you. That debt creates a motivation to do something in return. And right on cue, a request arrives. It might not even be direct. It might just be a situation that gets arranged. A scenario where you make what feels like your own choice. This is the core of it. Real manipulation doesn't work by taking away your options. Real manipulation works by handing you options. Options that all point in the same direction. You feel like you chose freely, but the menu itself was designed before you sat down. And that feeling of free choice is exactly what makes it so hard to push back later. It's difficult to feel wronged by a decision you made yourself. If you complain, the response is ready. But that was your call, wasn't it? This is the structural reason controlling relationships can go on for so long. The third stage is intermittent reinforcement. This is the stage that explains why certain relationships are so hard to leave. If approval and warmth are always there, they fade into the background. You stop noticing them. But when they arrive unpredictably, their impact becomes explosive. Think about why slot machines are so addictive. If something came out every single time you pulled the lever, you'd get bored fast. If nothing ever came out, you'd quit. But not knowing when it might come out, that creates the most powerful attachment of all. The idea that unpredictable patterns of warmth and withdrawal can create intense bonds and make leaving feel nearly impossible comes up consistently in psychological discussions of trauma bonding. Whether the person doing it is conscious of it or not, a relationship where warmth and coldness alternate without any pattern you can predict can condition the brain to respond more and more intensely in pursuit of that warmth. What you experience at this stage is not just emotion. This is a learned response pattern becoming hardwired. Thinking about that relationship alone can trigger your brain's reward circuitry. That's why the relationship can be painful and still feel impossible to leave. Knowing you should walk away while continuing to be pulled back is not a failure of willpower. It may be a deeply conditioned pattern that's already in place. I want to pause here for a second. If someone specific came to mind while you were listening to this, that matters. We'll come back to what that means in a moment.
So the three stages we've covered: connection through approval, planting a sense of debt, intermittent reinforcement. When these combine, they create an extremely powerful psychological structure. But there's one more thing you need to understand. This structure looks like it's imposed entirely from the outside. In reality, it isn't. For this pattern to take hold, there has to be a certain internal soil that receives it. Where does that soil come from? In many cases, it traces back to early relationship experiences, though later relationships and environments also shape and reinforce these patterns. In the earliest period of our lives, we learn to read the emotional states and reactions of the people around us because our survival depends on it. We learn which behaviors earn acceptance and which earn rejection. When that learning happens in an inconsistent environment, in a situation where you could never quite predict when warmth was coming, a person can grow into an adult who constantly monitors the emotional states of others, always on alert. Is this person in a good mood or a bad one? Did I do something wrong? How do I need to adjust the situation? Running those calculations on a continuous loop. This can look like empathy, and honestly, the person may be genuinely gifted at reading people. But if that ability doesn't come from a place of choice, if it comes from anxiety, then it's not a strength, it's a vulnerability. And people who want to move you will reach that vulnerability first. At this point, a lot of people slide into self-criticism. I have this history, so I have these patterns, which means I'm weak. But that's exactly backwards. The value of understanding this structure is not so you can blame yourself. The value is so you can stop blaming yourself. If you found yourself repeating the same patterns in certain relationships, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means a very old piece of learning is running inside you. And at the time it was formed, that learning was adaptive. It was what you needed to survive. The reason it's causing problems now is not because it was wrong then. It's because the situation has changed and the learning hasn't been updated yet. So how do you update it? Most people want a specific answer, a checklist for spotting dangerous people, a set of phrases to use when you feel manipulated. But let's go back to what we said at the beginning. The moment you raise your antenna to read, someone signals, you're already in a disadvantaged position. Now, that line should land differently than it did the first time you heard it. When your focus is on detecting manipulation, you're still reactive. You're still analyzing someone else's behavior, interpreting it, adjusting yourself in response. The tool has changed. The structure is identical. Real change comes from somewhere else entirely. It comes from moving the reference point for your own responses, from the outside to the inside, instead of how is this person reacting, being the standard that drives your behavior. The standard becomes, what do I actually care about? That sounds simple when you say it out loud, but making it real requires genuinely deep internal work. The first part of that work is observing your own emotional responses, noticing what you feel in a given situation, before judging whether the feeling is right or wrong. This is harder than it sounds. We are far more practiced at evaluating our emotions than simply experiencing them. I feel this way because of what they did, or the problem is that I'm feeling this at all. We rush to interpret and assess. The practice is learning to stay with the feeling itself. Before the commentary starts, the second part is recognizing your own needs. In this situation, what do I actually want? Approval? Connection? Safety? Something else? This question matters, because when you know your own needs clearly, it becomes much harder for someone else to hold those needs hostage. When you don't know what you need, that need stays exposed, shakeable from the outside. The third part is setting boundaries, and this is widely misunderstood. A boundary is not about controlling or pushing away the other person. A boundary is internal clarity about what you will accept and what you won't. When that's clear inside you, you don't need a confrontation. You don't need to win an argument or convince anyone of anything. You just behave according to your own standard. That's it. When all three of these are working together, the levers available to someone who wants to move you shrink considerably. That internal soil, the soil of vulnerability we talked about earlier, gets denser. Even if the controlling person doesn't disappear from your life, the range of influence they have over you changes in ways you'll actually be able to feel. Let's go back to the beginning. People study manipulation because they want to feel safe. But the act of studying manipulation is already happening inside the psychological structure that makes you responsive to it in the first place. That's treating the symptom while the actual problem goes untouched. And the actual problem is not out there. The actual problem is this question: why does this person's reaction feel so important to me? When you can face that question honestly, something shifts. Knowing the patterns of a relationship is interesting, but knowing the patterns and being free from them are completely different conversations. Freedom is not a skill, it's a change in your relationship with yourself. When someone tries to move you, the most powerful reason it doesn't work is not because you spotted the technique, it's because you no longer need their approval. A person who doesn't need your approval requires a completely different approach to influence. And in most controlling relationships, the other person simply won't bother. There are easier targets everywhere. If what we talked about today left a question alive inside you, carry it with you. You don't need to answer it right now. The fact that the question is alive is already the beginning of change. Why does this person's reaction feel so significant to me? When did I start spending this much energy reading the room? Those questions will take you where you need to go. Maybe not quickly, but they will get you there, because in the end, the person hardest to manipulate isn't the one who sees every move coming. It's the one who has nothing left to prove.